Welcome to this section on how to build a high-performing and accountable organization. So at this point, you've constructed an organizational profile which tells you who you've got, where they are, and what they're doing. And if you followed the process, you'll understand that you have what I would call a lot of lumpiness. So there'll be a lot of people and a lot of resource pursuing goals that aren't necessarily aligned to what the organization's trying to do. You'll also have an organization that isn't structured in a way that allows it to function the way that it should. So this section deals with how you take that and mold it into the organization that you want so that it functions in an accountable way in support of a high-performing health system. And we're going to consider three things. We're going to talk about conditions for accountability at an individual level. We'll talk about conditions of accountability in the way that different parts of the organization are put together. And most importantly, from a health delivery point of view, we'll talk about how you roll all the different parts of your organization up so that they support the delivery of patient-centered health services. So let's start with first things first. When it comes to consideration of an individual, any person can have more than one role, but in a particular role, they can only report to one person. You can't have more than one person in charge of you. This just creates confusion. Sure, you can have two roles and you can have a different person in charge in each of those roles, but in a particular role, only one person can be the boss, if we can use that term. The person who supervises you day to day also should be the person who manages you. All too often we find that the supervisor is different from the manager. The person who decides what you get paid, whether you get a raise or not, and whether you can go on leave, is the person who manages you, and they should be the person you report to. These are fairly simple rules, but you'd be surprised how often they're not followed. If we now take the next step and we say, well, people are usually either as individuals or as part of a team responsible for a particular function. Most organizations have all of these functions, particularly in health. So you have a radiology department, a department of surgery, a coffee cart, a canteen, a mortuary, you name them, you'll have them. However, they'll all be put together in a slightly different way. And so we need to come up with some rules about how departments are put together or grouped so that they can be accountable, and particularly the manager of that department. And so we need to consider the rules for accountability when applied to a department. So in the accountable organization, we say that anyone can be the manager of a department as long as they can add value to what that department does or produces. The manager of a department, or a resource center, which is the other name for a department, must know who they're accountable to, what they're accountable for. They must know who reports to them, and they must have control over the processes and the part of the system that produces the things that they're accountable for. All of these must be wrapped up and described in an operational plan for the department and the manager to follow, and there should be a mechanism for reporting how the people are progressing relative to that plan. Again, these are very simple rules, but hardly ever followed. If you don't believe me, take a cross-section of department managers in your organization, sit them down, and run them through a checklist such as the one you'll find in the book attached to this website. It's a simple yes-no as to whether they meet the conditions I've just gone through. I think you'll be pretty surprised as to how few parts of your organization can be accountable. It's at this point I would warn you to stay well away from people who use terms like drive performance or drive accountability, because these are usually phrases used by people who don't understand that an organization has to be put together in a certain way to be accountable. Once you've done that, it can't help but be accountable. In the absence of all the groundwork and the structural things that need to be done for the function to flourish, slogans like driving performance and driving accountability are in fact extremely harmful. The last part of this chapter will look at how you take all of the departments and resource centers you have and put them together in such a way that it reflects the purpose of your organization. And this is an extremely important consideration. Most healthcare organizations have as their most recognizable arrangement structures that are, if not doctor-centric, then certainly profession-centric. By this I mean the most recognizable part of the organization is something like surgical services or the Department of Surgery, and the Department of Medicine, and the Department of Radiology, and so forth. Nowhere in this does it mention the fact that in this day and age, most of these departments have to work together to deliver an array of services for different groups of patients. And so it's really important that we think about purposeful design of high-performing and accountable organisations, that if we want them to be patient-centred, we really ought to roll up the different departments and resource centres so that they actually support, as its primary function, the delivery of patient-centred services. It's about now we start to discover that we haven't even worked out what this should be. We don't have a classification system or a taxonomy for the kinds of patient-centred services we claim we want to deliver. It's possible to recognise things like acute services.
Please help me. I've fallen over.
Or elective services.
Oh, my head hurts.
But in each of these you have different subgroups of patients.
Oh, I've got an old knee injury.
Who have similar needs of the health system that aren't going to be met by profession-based departmental aggregates. Now, it's important that we don't lose overall sight of what we're trying to do here. You're going to start with an organisational profile that reflects what you currently have today and what it's actually doing today. The long-term goal is through a series of iterations to move your organisation so that it meets accountability conditions both for the individual, for the department, and for the way in which you've put these departments together to reflect the overall purpose of the organisation. It doesn't have to happen today. It doesn't have to happen this week. It doesn't have to happen this month. But everyone ought to understand that that's where you're going, and that's what the purpose of what you do day to day is meant to be. There are a lot of complex thoughts involved in this chapter, albeit the rules are quite simply depicted. I would strongly encourage you to take your time and work through the chapter and the contents of the book attached to this website. Again, please feel free to contact me if you need any further clarification or if you wish to challenge anything I've said. Good luck.